Hey everyone, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. So if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And now on to today's topic. Today we are going to talk about the lost Yuma Ledge of Gold. And it is not named Yuma for Yuma, Arizona as the location or anything like that. Yuma was the nickname of the man who was showed this ledge and told the story. And anyhow, that was his nickname. He had been stationed at Yuma, which was how he got the nickname. But just so you know, it's not in the Yuma, Arizona area. But we'll go into more of the details now. So there was an article, I believe it was in early 1941 in Desert Magazine, that had mentioned a badly rusted Colt revolver that had been found in more recent years around that time. So I don't know if it was in the 1920s or 30s or whenever that was, but somewhere fairly recently before the 1941 article. And this Colt revolver was mentioned as being found around the Aravipa Canyon area in Arizona. This was said to be near the old Fort Grant. So with this being mentioned this way in the article, the old Fort Grant, the new Fort Grant moved many, many miles away. The old fort was at the confluence of Aravipa Creek with the San Pedro River, which is just west of Aravipa Canyon, whereas the new Fort Grant got moved far east of there near the base of Mount Graham, many, many miles east. So the fact that the story mentions Old Fort Grant is pertinent because it gives us the time frame when the time frame wasn't mentioned specifically in the story. And the Old Fort Grant, or Camp Grant as it was also known at the time, it was in existence at this location near Aravipa Creek and the San Pedro River. It was there from 1866 to 1872. Now, a lot of things had mentioned that it was called Camp Grant most of the time, but being as it was moved and officially named a fort, then people referring to it would many times call it the old Fort Grant. So anyhow, the time frame we're talking about here when this story happens is somewhere between 1866 and 1872, because the old fort was there and the people in the story had stopped at this old fort at this original location here. So this is a time frame of the story, even though the story specifically doesn't say what the year is. So this rusty revolver that was found was thought to be a great clue to the lost Yuma Ledge of Gold somewhere in this area. But there's a lot more detailed story that goes along with that find, and it starts with a man called Yuma. This gentleman called Yuma, he acquired that nickname because he used to be the quartermaster at Fort Yuma near the Colorado River, near present-day Yuma, Arizona. And Yuma was not a particularly good quartermaster, as he was said to be a bit negligent and he was not keeping very good track of the supplies and all the things that he was in charge of. And he apparently was not very good at that, to the degree that he was court-martialed and he was discharged from the army. So I don't know if he was taking supplies or things like that, and a lot of stuff was missing. But regardless of what the situation was, I guess it was severe enough that he was discharged from the Army, and he had then felt ashamed of his situation. He lost a lot of his military friends and colleagues and acquaintances, and so it was said that he went and hid amongst the Yuma Native American tribe in the area that was under Chief Pasquale. And this gentleman that was known as Yuma, he was actually very well liked by the Yuma natives, and he regularly traded with them and lived amongst them. And eventually he met a native Yuma woman whom he married. And since Yuma, this gentleman named Yuma, his current profession was a trader, a person who acquires goods and trades them, and this was the profession he took up after the Army. So because he was a trader, he spent most of his time trading with other tribes, even including the Apaches. Now, he took his Native American wife with him most of the time when he did a lot of his trading and deals and stuff like that, and it's likely that that made it easier for him to trade with other native tribes, being as he had a Native American wife. Maybe he was a little bit more accepted. One time when he was trading with the Aravaipa Apache, he heard a rumor of a rich gold ledge where these Apaches had been obtaining their gold ore that they used to trade with him and to procure supplies and things like that from this gentleman Yuma. So obviously this band of Apaches had, I guess, what seemed like a never-ending supply of gold ore, and Yuma really wanted to know where they got this rich gold ore. But the Apaches said that they got it from a ledge in the mountains, and they kept it secret as to where exactly that location was. But Yuma would ask them periodically, and one time Yuma went as far as to offer them a rifle and some ammunition and a few other things if they would show him where this ore came from. And it seems at this point he had become more of a friend to the Apaches, or at least this band of Apaches, and he had traded with them for quite some time, and they probably felt that he treated them right when it came to trading and making deals with them. And so at this point, the Apache finally agreed, and they said that they would accompany Yuma to the north into their Apache camp, and there the Apache chief said that they would go ahead and show Yuma where this ledge was. So from the Apache camp, wherever this was, it doesn't say specifically where this camp was, but from there, they traveled about 9 miles to a spot where the San Pedro River was on the east side of them, and they were standing on a high ridge where there was a deep, rough canyon to the west of them. So they have the river on the east and a canyon on the west, and it sounds like they're standing on a high ridge. And this canyon ended just a ways to the west, so it seems like it may have been a canyon that dead-ended or turned into a box canyon or something like that. But in front of them on this high ground that they were on, there was a sunken crater-like depression. And in this depression was an outcropping of rose quartz that was rich in gold. So the Apaches let Yuma get out his little pick and take a fair amount or a few handfuls of this rose quartz that had the gold laced through it, and they let him take some. And he took out his pick or his knife, and he carved quite a few samples out of this outcropping. And it was said that the gold was laced through this quartz pretty well, and Yuma was very pleased. So after Yuma took his gold samples, the Apaches, they allowed him to keep those gold samples, and they carefully covered up the outcropping with dirt and then piled some rocks against it, so there was really no sign of where the gold could be seen anymore. So it sounds like it was a very low-lying vein of quartz, maybe only a foot or so off of the ground. We don't really know how deep this depression was either. So anyhow, but it was easily covered up afterwards with some dirt and rocks, and it covered it up to where it was not able to be seen, or you couldn't tell that there was any sign of any mining or any gold or anything like that in this particular spot once they left. So the gentleman named Yuma, he was not a prospector, but he could tell this ore was fairly rich in gold and was very valuable. It was pretty obvious to his eye that, that this was some good stuff, and he obviously knew that already because the Apaches were trading it with him and everything. And Yuma also knew that if the Apaches ever found him here again without them allowing him here or guiding him here, that he would likely be killed. So Yuma eventually made his way to Tucson, where he did show the ore to a man by the last name of Crittenden. And Crittenden was a freighter and an acquaintance of Yuma. So a freighter is a person that freights goods from one place to another. So likely they knew each other because they had similar professions. Since Crittenden was a freighter and freighted goods, and Yuma procured or acquired goods for trade and did things like that, they probably ran across each other quite often, especially in Tucson, which was probably one of the main hubs of a lot of activity back in those days. So anyhow, Yuma makes his way to Tucson. He shows Crittenden this ore that he has. Crittenden looks at it, and he could tell it was very rich ore, and he wanted in on the action. And it seems that Yuma knew better than to go back, but maybe he felt he just did not get enough ore the first time, so he actually agreed to go back with Crittenden. So this tells me that maybe the Apaches let him have, 3 or 4 handfuls of this ore, but maybe he felt like he really wanted a fair amount more to last him a lot longer, be able to cash in for significantly more money. So anyhow, him and Crittenden, they make a plan. They decide they're going to go back for more because Yuma wants some more himself too. And they left Tucson, and they rode all night, and they made it to Old Fort Grant the next morning. So they let their horses recharge here and drink, and the two gentlemen did the same. They relaxed and made sure that they were up for their mission ahead. Later that afternoon, they headed north down the San Pedro River. After about 10 miles or so, it was going to start getting dark, and they figured they better make camp. So they made camp in the bush near the river, and likely tried to make sure that they stayed hidden. So it's very likely they didn't make a fire or anything like that. Once morning came, they continued north, but soon it became very rough, and they could not ride their horses anymore, and they had to hop off of their horses and lead them the rest of the way. They soon arrived at that long, high ridge on the west side of the river. And that ridge overlooked the river to the east and that box canyon to the west. And they soon found the spot, that lower lying depression, and they excavated it a bit, and they took about 25 to 30 pounds of that gold laden ore. Then they covered the ore bearing site up with dirt and rocks and tried to make it look very similar to when the Apaches had covered it up before. And they made sure the coast was clear, and they took off. And I believe they made it back to the old Fort Grant, and then they carefully made it back into Tucson by the next morning. And it doesn't say that they actually stopped at Fort Grant, but they probably just retraced their steps, made it back to Tucson without encountering anyone. And once they were there, this ore was crushed, and it netted them about $1,200 in gold. So, a lot of money. They knew the Apache had not been very friendly to most people around this time, so they decided they were lucky to get out of there and not encounter any Native Americans, and they split their money between them. And Crittenden went back to freighting goods, and Yuma went back to trading goods. And likely, when you think about this story, likely what happened was this. Eventually, when the Apaches came back to get more gold, they probably noticed that a lot more excavation had been done here. And with that being said, if they knew that they hadn't done any more excavation or taken any more gold out of there, and if they had been mining this area themselves for quite a while and never had an issue with gold disappearing or any of the rock disappearing, if it always looked like the last time that they left it, and now that they showed Yuma this spot, and the next time they come back, now they can tell someone's been there and mined a heck of a lot more rock out of there, you can kind of gather what likely happened at that point. They probably realized, the first time we've told a white man about this particular spot, and we showed him where it was, we let him have a few handfuls of it. Now the next time we come back, there's a lot more rock gone. We can tell that he's been here. This has never happened to us before. I mean, we don't know. We're just kind of speculating that very likely could be what happened. The next time they come back, if they notice that things look different, and of course the Native Americans were very keen on being very observant and noticing things, if they saw either tracks in the area or just saw that it looked different and it had been excavated more, then they likely were going to be on the lookout for Yuma. And you would guess after this that Yuma probably wouldn't be trading with them for a while. He'd want to keep a low profile. And that seems to be what Yuma thought, because he didn't stay around the Tucson area or, any of those areas where he had traded with the Apache. The last time anyone had seen Yuma, he and his Native American wife were heading west toward the Papago country. And the Papago Native Americans were generally friendly peoples, unlike the Apache. And that gave, them, I guess, feelings of maybe they were planning on hiding with them, or at least feeling that they could blend into another Native American community, or maybe pass through that community and not have any problems, being as the Papago people were generally very friendly people and the Apaches generally weren't. Now, the Apaches had been very friendly to Yuma up to this point, but they weren't to most white men. But the Papagos said that they had a story, and this story that had been passed down more recently was that a renegade band of Apaches had crossed paths with Yuma and his Native American wife at Growler Pass or Growler Pass north of Quito Baquito. And the Apaches killed Yuma and his wife at this point, and they left the bodies there. And the Papagos said that they found them and then they then buried them a few 100 feet west of the old road that leads to the pass and on down to Cipriano Wells near the Arizona-Mexico border. When Crittenden didn't see Yuma or his wife for many months, and no one in Tucson had heard from him or seen him or his wife for many months, then Crittenden figured that they likely met foul play. Eventually, Crittenden decided that he would return to the Gold Ledge alone. He knew where it was. So he rode to the old Fort Grant and he rested there for a couple of days. And at the fort, he went ahead and told the officers of his plan and relayed all the details of the find and where he was going to go, or at least a general idea of where he was going to go, because he wanted to let them know if he didn't come back within a couple of days that they should come looking for him. So it doesn't say that he told them exactly where the ledge was, but he may have told them somewhat of a general area, a couple of officers there. And the officers warned him not to go, as the Apaches were just too dangerous and it wasn't worth it. But Crittenden felt fairly safe and felt fairly good because he was armed with a Colt revolver and a repeating rifle. So after several days of Crittenden not showing back up at the fort, a search party was sent out from the fort. 10 miles north down the San Pedro River, they did find his horse tied to a tree, and his horse was nearly dead from dehydration. So at this point, they looked all around this area, and Crittenden was nowhere to be found. An old rusty rifle was found in the area many years later, and then many years after that, a rusty old Colt revolver was found in that same area. So it seems likely that maybe something else happened to Crittenden, because if he was attacked by the Apaches, it seems very likely that they would have taken his guns. I don't think that they would just be left in the desert. I guess it's hard to say, but if the guns were there, if he was attacked by them, or if an arrow was shot at him and he was killed, then I would think his bones would be somewhere by his guns. But I believe the guns were in the same general area, but we don't know, specifically if they might have been a few feet from each other and just found at different times, or what that situation was. But maybe Crittenden got hurt, had some kind of accident or something like that. Maybe he got bitten by a big diamondback rattlesnake or something, or a Mojave or something like that could account for the fact that maybe he succumbed to injuries and they just never found his body, in which case his guns were dropped and gradually rusted in the desert with some of the desert rains here and there. That seems more likely, because it seems like we would have found his body otherwise. Maybe he fell into a canyon or a crevasse or something like that. That happens to people too. It's hard to say. But obviously he tied up his horse. He may have climbed up to higher ground to get a vantage point of where he was. Something could have happened if he got bit by a snake, or if he had some bad footing and he fell down a slope or something like that. There are various things that could have happened. And I guess it's possible that he could have got attacked by the Apaches, but it seems likely that we would have found his body at that point. Someone would have found it, and they likely would not have found his guns. If he was taken out by the Apache, they probably would have came up and taken his guns. So it's hard to say what happened to Crittenden exactly, but anyhow, he was never seen again. and we really don't know specifically any more details than what was told about where this ledge is. And I know there's been a lot of mining in this region, especially in the Hayden, Arizona area, and I don't know how far down the San Pedro River they went, but it could have been, somewhere in that mining district too. So there could be another spot out there. This could be a spot that's still undiscovered and is waiting to be found. We might not know for sure. So anyhow, that is the story of the lost gold ledge of Yuma.